Good afternoon. My name is Frank Stowell. I'm Emeritus Professor of Systems and Information Systems at the University of Portsmouth. I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about the appreciative inquiry method and soft action research. I'd like to start the session with a quotation. Everything we hear is an opinion. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. The importance of this quotation is the recognition of our subjective experience that shapes the way that we understand the world, our world, the outcome of which is likely to be based on something from our past with which we are familiar. I believe organizational inquiry and research into organizations need to keep this in their mind and take it into account. So organizational inquiry means that we must recognize that organizations exist in a turbulent environment. They need to adapt to changing circumstances in order to survive. It's unlikely that a universal model of how an organization operates can be found. Jekyll and Holwell said, a situation in which an organization exists means that any real-world example is a source of immense and changing complexity. They are in a continuous state of change, i.e. they're not homogeneous through time. There is no universal model of an organization. We should expect that each situation will be unique, and we should be aware of what Jeffrey Vickers called our readinesses, that is, ideas or experiences that we've had in the past that we incorporate into our thinking about the new situation. We should put to one side our assumptions. We should bracket these ideas in what phenomenology calls epoche, as to bracket them and seek to gain understanding of the essence of the thing that we're looking at. The University of Lancaster's 30-year research program came up with three important observations. First, an organization is a social collectivity which shows multiple worldviews and worldviews that would change over time, and also a would-be purposeful activity. So there's a clear indication there that the organization that we start to inquire in is ever-changing. It's not static. And this is important in the way that we set about our inquiry. Now, the 30-year plus research at Lancaster University, in which I played a minor role, emerging from that research was soft systems methodology, a very important outcome, which I think is familiar to everyone at this conference and probably to all practitioners and researchers worldwide. But the second, and I believe often overlooked, is the notion of soft systems itself. The work of Jekyll and others at Lancaster during this period developed the idea of soft systems, which in the systems community was quite revolutionary. But I think the power of SSM, the methodology which comes out of soft systems, has prevented us from looking at soft systems ideas and developing other applications and other thinking. Soft systems thinking is an acknowledgement of the importance of subjectivity. Everything exists in a world of personal experience, which shapes the way we behave. We learn from our experience of our surrounding world, which is meaningful in a specific way for each of us. Soft problems are regarded as those in complex situations where desirable ends cannot be taken as given. Soft systems is a compromise between phenomenology as a philosophy and phenomenology in practice. Soft systems practice is enhanced by embracing the notion of subjectivity that underpins everyone's often undeclared opinion. Soft system thinking assumes the process of inquiry can all be organized into a system. The crucial concept in systemic inquiry is that of moving systemicity from the real world to the process of inquiry. In 1983, some time ago now, Cheklam wrote a paper in which he declared that operational research and organizational inquiry were dominated by the sense of systematically ordered thinking as opposed to thinking systemically. They sought to transfer the empirical method of natural science into real-world operation. So we have methods of organizational inquiry at the time, and I would argue still, where we are trying to imagine an organization as a thing which can be encapsulated as from a frozen moment in time, and use methods of analysis which are based on those of natural science. In order to gain understanding, the inquirer should seek to be part of the organization, try to find out from within, immerse themselves in what is happening. If we can steal Sir Geoffrey Vicker's title of one of his books, human systems are different. Empirical research involves interaction with human groups, and so we should recognize that human situations are complex and should be treated as such. Since judgments by humans are affected by human experience, humans can appreciate the value of a situation as well as the factual description. In other words, understand the context. The situation is ever reforming, and there is no universal laws of behavior. An analysis of any situation by the participants will be different in each situation, and the concerns of those involved are highly personal and subjective. So, organizational inquiry and action research. Perhaps we can think of the three main ideas behind what we do. We can group them into mathematics, science, and action. In mathematics, we start with an axiom, which is a proposition that's not proven or demonstrated, but considered self-evident. And through the process of logic, end up with a theorem. A hypothesis is a specific statement of prediction in the natural sciences. It's fundamental. The outcome of that experiment is repeatable. Findings of gravity in Hampshire will be the same as findings of gravity in Peru. The way that we reassure ourselves with the hypothesis, we try to refute its validity. And the more we fail in that, the more reliable that hypothesis becomes. With action or action research, we start with a framework of ideas. We take action based on that framework of ideas, and then we reflect upon those ideas, which themselves enrich our original framework, and we go on in a cycle of learning until we feel we've learnt as much as we can. We can represent this in a simple diagram like this, where we have an idea which is applied to the situation of interest. We learn the lessons. We apply those lessons to the idea, which develops the idea. We apply it again. And we go around this cycle of learning until we've learnt as much as we think we can. This cycle of learning is fundamental to soft ideas. The researcher becomes immersed in the research, involving participation, and is seeking an understanding, not a solution. Our question is, though, how do we do it? We should recognise that the tools we use for inquiry and analysis may well affect the outcome. C. West Churchman wrote, "The inquiring system has the capability of asking itself what an inquiring system would be like which did not function according to the basic principles of its own design." In other words, we must be aware that the tools we use aren't predicated to a particular kind of outcome. What he was arguing, and what Peter Checkland has argued, the method of inquiry should be agnostic to the situation. It should not itself determine the kind of outcome. Using soft ideas as a means of inquiry, SSM is the prime example. But the appreciative inquiry is an associated and complementary approach, which has shown its value in several research projects. If I can briefly recap, it was a research project which Dawn West and I did, in which we intended to use soft systems methodology. The research itself was in a busy international company, and the managers themselves were obviously very busy doing their managing job. And we realized that it would be difficult to persuade them to come together to actually use SSM. They couldn't afford to give up the time, either collectively or individually. So we had to find another way of understanding what they thought the job of manager was in this case. And we found one way of doing this was a form of Venn diagram, which could be used for them to express their thoughts about a given question, which could be done in a very short time. We needed to spend with them, I think it was 3 short sessions, which were broken into small packages, some as short as 5 minutes. But it's worth underlining the fact that we started here from an agreed definition of the problem to be explored. Dawn and I knew the question that the company wanted answering, and we developed from there. Whereas SSM, you're exploring the situation of interest. So this is in essence the outline of the diagram. The outline of the approach in form of a diagram. The appreciative inquiry method, as it became known subsequently, has evolved since that time and is a valuable means of organisational inquiry. It can be used as a suitable alternative to SSM, where there's been an agreed question or issue to be explored. The issue or question we found often becomes modified as a natural part of the process. It is, I think, also a suitable vehicle for soft AR. And many people familiar with soft systems can quickly pick up aspects of it. We can show it diagrammatically here. It starts with phase 1, which is to produce systems maps, which expresses the need. In stage 2, we produce a composite map, which is a combination of all the individual maps from which we define the need. From this, we actually model the defined need, and out of the model comes actions for change. The process between stage 1 and stage 2 and stage 3 is iterative, of course, and I'll quickly explain what that looks like. What I would like also to do at this stage is to express my thanks to Dawn, whose research began this journey over a few decades now, which other doctrinal researchers have developed too. And I believe that AIM now is a useful method of undertaking organisational inquiry and undertaking action research. Notably, the work of Shivendri Kure in Boston and Donna Champion at Trent University, and Penny Hart and Pavla Kramarova here at Portsmouth, who have contributed to our thinking on this. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to before we move on to an example is the notion of what is and what ought. This is Geoffrey Vickers' notion of the appreciative system, and he refers to what is being reality judgment and what ought as judgments of the significance of these facts. The reason that I draw your attention to this is that when people are recounting or describing or drawing or recording their feelings about a situation, they often mix what is the case, what is going on now, in their opinion, with what they think ought to be the case. And if you think about it, if you have a description or a diagram which says a mix is an ought, then it's very difficult to know how to proceed. So what we've found with appreciative inquiry, that we can actually highlight this as part of the process going through. So it's important to recognize what is and what ought to be the case. Just one more thing before I give an example. Approximate times for each stage, and this is based on face-to-face. It's very different when you're doing it virtually, as Pavla did this year. It changes the nature of the way that you do it, and I think the work that Pavla has produced is very interesting and got some interesting observations which can be applied to all action research, but that's for another time. Okay, there are 3 main activities per participant. Each participant does the same activity. Stage 1, systems maps. They're asked to produce a systems map, which takes approximately 5 to 10 minutes. They're shown, the participants are shown what we're going to ask them to do. They understand this very quickly, and we give them a simple example, and they picked it up in, I would say, in the face-to-face situation, no longer than 5 minutes. In phase 2, it might take up to 20 minutes, and the idea is to bring together the what is the case individual diagrams into a composite map. This itself is part of a cycle of learning, because as each individual shows their individual map, this is discussed by other people, and gradually they work towards something which they can all accept represents their combined views. Phase 3, we move on to the same kind of activity, but this time it's what ought to be the case. And that is judgments of the significance of those facts. So out of this, at this stage, comes a composite map of what ought to be the case, what it should look like, in their opinion. In stage 2, which takes roughly 30 to 60 minutes, we combine the ought maps into a composite map and define the need. In stage 3, from that definition, we produce a model which takes approximately 20 to 30 minutes and produces an agreed agenda for action for change. So just to remind you, AIM starts with an issue or question to be addressed. And it's in the form of a Venn diagram. So here we have in the center a question or issue. The participants are then asked to construct the rest of the diagram, with what the issue or question means to them. We use is and ought here, as I've explained in the previous example. So we have a question. So on their Venn diagram, there's an opinion 1, opinion 2, opinion 3, and so on. It's a very quick activity. Okay, so here's an example of a map. And this is a what is the case map. And the question that was posed was, what are my chief concerns about the coronavirus? This was something I did right at the beginning of the coronavirus, whenever that was, 2020, and before we had a new vaccine. So the way that that question was answered was, people thought it would damage the economy, which of course it did. Damage to health, well, that was certainly the case. Restriction of freedom, which is also the case because we were going to shut down, or we did shut down. Concerns about job loss, which also has happened. Also, that the health service was going to be under strain. Remember the Nightingale hospitals, it was under considerable strain. And of course, the disgrace of the care homes, which I won't expand on, and other ideas. So this was, if you like, an individual, or an individual map of what is the case for the coronavirus at that time. Okay, so then we can talk about what ought to be the case. Once again, the same question. And this time, people had separated between is and ought. So what ought to be the case was a secure plan to protect business and jobs. What ought to be the case was an improved early warning system for pandemics. What ought to be the case is a restructuring of the health service. Well, we're still waiting for that. What ought to be the case was an efficient and reliable track and trace system, which I think, well, we may or may not have ended up with. Improved health monitoring and controlling care homes. That was certainly something that was wanted, and other ideas. But you get the general gist of a systems map. This is what ought to be the case, and you could juxtapose the two if you wanted to. We could then decide from, let's say, this what ought to be the case, systems which we think are most important. Now remember, this is a fictitious example, and we could say that the W or Weltanschauung behind this example is that the participants seem to share the view that COVID-19 would not be the last of the pandemics that threaten the human population. So this is a system that we need to develop for the future, not just for the current situation. So if we take one of these, we can develop it into a diagram. Let's take, for example, improve health monitoring and control in care homes. Here is a definition which those of you familiar with soft system methodology will recognize as a root definition. So what we have here, first of all, is to start with the all-important boundary. This is something that we found vitally important, and it highlighted it with Pavla's research over the last year or so, because it enables you to contain the research without having people in that shouldn't be there, and for you to bring people in that weren't originally considered. But this is another discussion for another time. So we have the boundary. Then we can construct an activity model. In SSM, it'd be a conceptual model, and we can produce the activities that, in my view, in this case, fulfills the definition which is in red at the bottom there. Now, the advantage of this this diagram is that it enables you then, as a decision taker, to decide the responsibility of each of these activities, whether someone can function just one or several of these activities. In other words, you can build, if you like, a human/computer-based model of how this would operate. Okay, so in summary then, I'd like to draw your attention to the importance of subjectivity and how that shapes what we see, for example, Weltanschauung. The importance of boundary, which we found very, very important, both in a face-to-face environment, but also in a virtual environment. The recognition of what is and what ought to be the case, the separation of them, and I think people can very quickly pick that up. The importance of the method of inquiry. Clearly, I firmly believe in soft systems, and I think a soft systems methodology in particular, and hopefully appreciative inquiry method, are both agnostic to the problem. They are not predicated to a particular outcome. The importance of engagement, engaging all the participants, and the value of soft systems ideas as a basis of inquiry, the cycle of learning which produces understanding before a solution. The key thing is the process of understanding through the process of the cycle of learning. Okay, that's all I have now, because I think I've run out of time. If you've got any other questions or anything you want to discuss, let me know. But I'll hand over now to the chair. Thank you very much.